I still remember the exact moment my life shattered into 1,000 pieces that I've spent the last 8 years trying to glue back together. I was 17 years old, sitting in my guidance counselor's office at Lincoln High School, holding an acceptance letter from the University of Pennsylvania. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the words on the page. Full ride scholarship, 4 years, complete coverage, tuition, room, board, books, everything. I remember thinking it was impossible. It was a miracle. It was the answer to a prayer I'd been whispering every single night since my parents died 3 years earlier in a car accident. I had nothing. My grandmother had taken me in, but she was barely scraping by on her pension. There was no college fund waiting for me. There were no trust funds or inheritance. There was just this broken kid trying to survive high school while carrying the weight of grief that threatened to pull me under every single day. So when that scholarship letter arrived, I felt like the universe was finally giving me a break. Like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. The letter said the scholarship was funded by a private foundation called the Ashford Educational Trust. It didn't give me any names, just a letterhead and a mission statement about investing in promising young scholars with exceptional potential and demonstrated need. I didn't care who was behind it, I was just grateful. I was terrified and grateful in equal measure. I spent that first year at Penn in a daze, floating through classes, working part-time at the library to cover the small gaps the scholarship didn't cover, trying desperately to feel like I belonged among these kids who had grown up with money and stability, and parents who were still alive. Everything was going according to plan. I was going to be someone. I was going to make my parents proud from wherever they were watching. And then, during the spring of my sophomore year, everything changed. I was doing research for a sociology paper in the university library, digging through old databases, when I typed in the name of my scholarship foundation just out of curiosity. I wanted to see if I could find out more about the people behind it, maybe even send them a thank you letter. What I found instead was a news article from 1998. It was a mugshot. And a name. James Ashford. The headline read, "Local businessman convicted of hit and run. Sentence reduced to 5 years due to mental health deterioration." My eyes went blurry. I reread it 3 times, convinced I was hallucinating. But the facts were right there in black and white. James Ashford had hit a car on Highway 40 in Pennsylvania. 2 people had died at the scene. The article didn't name them because the case was old, and the names were archived. But I knew. I knew with absolute certainty in that moment that the 2 people who died were my parents. I ran to the newspaper archives. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the mouse. I searched for articles from October 1991. There it was. Couple killed in hit and run on Highway 40, driver fled the scene. And then my parents' names, Sarah and Michael Chen. My mother and father, reduced to a headline, a statistic, a case number. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. I don't remember leaving the library. I don't remember walking back to my dorm. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on my bed, staring at my laptop screen, unable to process what I was seeing. The man who had killed my parents. The man who had taken everything from me. He had been the one funding my scholarship. For 2 years, I had been living off blood money. I had been standing on a foundation built with the guilt of the person who had destroyed my life. I felt sick. I felt betrayed in a way that was so profound, so violating that I couldn't even articulate it. I spent the next 3 hours researching James Ashford. I found out that he'd been released from prison in 2003, that he'd spent the years after his conviction, years that I'd spent in foster care, grieving my parents, struggling to survive, building what appeared to be a redemption narrative. He'd founded the Ashford Educational Trust in 2005, specifically to fund scholarships for students who had experienced trauma and loss. Charitable work, good deeds, atonement. On the surface, it seemed noble, but to me, it felt like the ultimate insult. It felt like he was trying to buy his way into heaven with money that should have gone to me, like he was trying to ease his conscience by playing savior to kids like me, kids whose pain he'd manufactured with his own recklessness. I called my grandmother that night. I told her what I'd found. I remember the sound of her breath catching on the other end of the line, followed by a long silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, baby," she said. "I didn't know how to tell you. I've known for years." The detective reached out to me when Ashford set up the foundation. They thought maybe it would help. Maybe it would be some kind of closure. I felt the anger rise in my chest like a tidal wave. "You knew?" I said, my voice cracking. "You knew this whole time and you didn't tell me?" "I was trying to protect you," she said. "You were so focused on your future, on getting out. I didn't want to ruin that for you." I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark of my dorm room and I let myself feel everything I'd been suppressing for years. Rage, betrayal, violation. The sense that my entire life had been built on a lie, on the blood of my parents, on the conscience of the man who had murdered them. I didn't go to class for a week. I barely left my dorm room. I was spiraling, caught in a loop of anger and confusion that I couldn't break out of. My roommate tried to help, but there was nothing she could say. How do you process something like that? How do you reconcile the fact that the person who had given you a future had stolen your past? I finally decided I needed to see him. I needed to look James Ashford in the face and confront him, because if I didn't, I was going to drown in this rage. It took me 2 weeks to find his address, another week to work up the courage to actually go. I took a bus out to his house in the suburbs, this sprawling, beautiful mansion that had probably been built with money made after he'd served his time. Blood money that had been laundered into legitimacy through real estate and investments and tax write-offs. I stood outside the gates for what felt like hours, just breathing, trying to steel myself for what was about to happen. Then I pressed the buzzer. A woman answered, her voice crisp and professional. "Yes? I'm here to see James Ashford," I said. "Tell him it's about the educational trust. Tell him it's about his scholarship recipients." There was a pause. Then the gates buzzed open. He was waiting for me at the door when I walked up. He was older than I expected, his hair gray, his face lined with what looked like genuine remorse. But I didn't care. I didn't want to see his humanity. I wanted to see a monster. "You're one of my scholars," he said. It wasn't a question. He recognized something in me. Maybe the pain that I'd been wearing like a second skin for all these years. "My name is Alex Chen," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "My parents were Sarah and Michael Chen. You killed them on Highway 40 in 1991, and then you paid for my college education like that was somehow supposed to make it right." I watched his face go pale. His hand went to his chest like he was having trouble breathing. For a moment, I thought he might have a heart attack right there in front of me, and I wasn't sure how I'd feel about that. Relief? Satisfaction? More confusion? "I didn't know," he said finally. "When I established the trust, I didn't know that any of my recipients. I had files redacted. I didn't want to know their names. I didn't want to know if any of them were connected to my past. I thought not knowing would protect them, protect me. But mostly them." I laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass. "Protect me? You've been lying to me for 2 years. You've been inserting yourself into my life without my consent, playing savior, playing redeemed, while I was living off guilt money." "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. What can I do to make this right?" And there it was, the question that broke something open inside me, because the answer was nothing. There was nothing he could do. My parents were dead. They would never get to see me graduate, never meet my future children, never get to experience the lives they should have had. No amount of money or apologies or charity could change that. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. "I don't want your money," I said, "and I don't want your apologies. I came here because I needed you to understand that what you did to me wasn't fixed by writing checks. My entire life has been shaped by your negligence, your recklessness, your decision to leave the scene and let my parents die in the road while you went home and poured yourself a drink." He was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face, and I realized something in that moment that changed everything. His pain didn't matter. My anger at him was justified, absolutely justified, but holding on to it was only hurting me. I was still alive. I could still have a future. My parents couldn't, and spending the rest of my life being angry at this broken man wasn't going to change that. I left his house that day without saying goodbye. I went back to university and I made a decision. I was going to finish my scholarship. I was going to take the money that he felt so guilty about, and I was going to use it to build the life that my parents never got to live. Not for him, not for his redemption. For them, for their memory, for the fact that they'd loved me fiercely in the time we had together, and they would have wanted me to survive. Over the course of the next 2 years, I finished my degree with honors. I started volunteering with a grief counseling organization that helped young people who had lost parents to accidents. I began writing about trauma and loss and the complicated process of forgiveness, not because I had to forgive James Ashford, but because I needed to forgive myself for being angry at the universe for taking my parents away. I never saw James Ashford again, but I learned that he'd drastically expanded the educational trust after our meeting. He'd started reaching out to other families he'd affected, trying to make amends in tangible ways. Whether that was genuine or performative, I honestly don't know anymore, and I realize that I don't need to know. His journey toward whatever redemption is possible for him is his to take. Mine is mine. I graduated from Penn with a degree in counseling psychology. I'm now working toward my master's degree, and I'm planning to open a nonprofit that provides free grief counseling to young people who have experienced loss. I'm taking the pain that almost destroyed me and I'm transforming it into purpose. My parents would have wanted that. They would have wanted me to take the wreckage of what happened to them and build something meaningful from it. Sometimes I think about that moment in the library when I found out the truth, and I realize that it wasn't the end of my story. It was a turning point. It was the moment I realized that I had more power than I thought, that the man who had taken my parents from me could not take my future unless I let him. And I refused to let him. I refused to let my past define me. I'm defining myself now, and it feels like freedom.